Quite interesting how in Canada, a Syrian refugee named Jihad pulling off a brutal terrorist attack in which 2 people were killed, and had the police not reacted incredibly quickly, it would have been a hell of a lot more than that. The police acted heroically. He had a bomb attached to his chest. He drove his car into innocent civilians, followed by a knife attack. Yet CBC, CTV, state propaganda choose not to cover this story whatsoever. You can see how the Liberal Party of Canada was re-elected in 2024, despite the fact that the past decade has been an absolute disaster for the Canadian people. Our propagandistic media simply lies to us. Anything related to immigration, anything related to issues that the Canadian people do not side with the Liberal Party on, and immigration is overwhelming. 3 in 4 Canadians, you will not find as overwhelming a consensus on nearly any issue, agree that we cannot withstand any more immigration. We've already had 8 million people come in the past decade. Mark Carney wants to have another 1.5 million people come in. It's been an absolute catastrophe for the middle and lower class in Canada. Our GDP per capita, the best measure of how the average Canadian is doing, has dropped 6 quarters in a row. Truly shocking in a first world country with the incredible natural resources that Canada has. Only malevolence can lead to a GDP per capita drop in 6 straight quarters. GDP dropped 1.6%. Standard of living continues to drop in Canada. CPI, which is a great measure of economic prosperity, continues to drop. Immigration has been an economic disaster for Canada, for middle and lower class Canadians. Maybe not for Mark Carney and his buddies at Brookfield Asset Management, the WF in Davos, who own trillion-dollar assets. But for the rest of us, there's no doubt that Justin Trudeau swinging the floodgates wide open for the past decade has been an absolute catastrophe for Canada and Canadians, once one of the most pro-immigration countries in the world. No, you can't say that Canada is a racist, Islamophobic country, whatever phobic you're going to throw at us, because it's simply not true. Canada is one of the most welcoming countries in the world. For you to have turned the population this extremely against immigration in this country, you know that the policy has been an absolute fucking catastrophe. So, you know what the mainstream media does? They know that 3 in 4 Canadians don't want immigration. They know the fact that Mark Carney is allowing another 1.5 million people into the country between permanent and temporary workers in 2025. The fact that we currently have 1.9 million people on the immigration mobility program, which does not even require the employer to fill out an LMIA. At least with the temporary foreign worker program, which by the way is much smaller, they need to justify the fact that they cannot hire a Canadian for a role, for a so-called high-skilled position. With the LMIA, which is actually a much larger issue, there's nearly 2 million people on it. They don't need, employer does not even need to justify why they can't hire a Canadian citizen into a role. In many of these cases, the government actually subsidizes, will pay up to 75% of an employee's salary. Think about that. That's traitorous. The Canadian government will literally pay employers to hire foreigners rather than Canadians. There's no other way to define that but traitorous. It's disgusting. It's disgusting when you think about it critically. Our ancestors who fought and died for this country, and now you're being sold down the river. The Canadian government is literally incentivizing companies to hire foreigners over Canadians. So the CBC, CTV Global, who, by the way, receive $1.5 billion a year from the Canadian taxpayer, total propaganda arm of the Liberal Party, go make them compete in the private market. Why did the Canadian people need to subsidize the CBC to spew out propaganda? If they want to go compete in the private market, like all of us, like all creators online. Go compete and see if you can do so. I'll bet you $1 million you can. It's crazy on YouTube, where I am. Nobody watches the CBC. They're receiving $1.5 billion a year. First of all, they turn the comments off. They don't even let you comment on their videos, which is disgusting. Free speech is the core bedrock of Canada. They turn their comments off on every post, and they get no views. It's embarrassing. I get more views on the majority of my video than the CBC, and they're receiving $1.5 billion from the Canadian taxpayer. But what they do is they are incredibly careful with what types of stories they touch. If you notice, anything negative related to immigration, the CBC, you will not find a single story. They just simply do not cover it. They know how unpopular the issue is among the Canadian people, and they are literally, it's not an exaggeration to say, they are an arm of the Liberal Party Mao's China, Stalin's Russia would be jealous of what the CBC does for Canada's Liberal Party, so they just don't touch it. You'll never read a negative immigration story on the CBC. Every once in a while, you'll read a positive immigration story, which of course there are positive immigration stories. Some people come to Canada, they contribute, and it's fantastic. But there's a large number of stories that are incredibly negative regarding immigration, and the CBC will never cover any of it. You will not find one negative immigration story there. Like I said, Syrian refugee comes in, commits a terror attack. No mention of it whatsoever. And I hope that the Canadian people just realize how disgusting it is and how propagandized we are. I know that a lot of Canadians who get their news from cable media, particularly older Canadians, assume I'm getting the straight news, assume it's the same it was 10, 20 years ago. It's not the case whatsoever. You are being propagandized on a level that, like I said, I feel as though Mao's China, Stalin's Russia would be jealous of. I, unfortunately, survey the CBC, CTV Global News very closely because I'm interested in seeing how they cover all of these different stories. And it continues to truly baffle me that the Liberal Party of Canada, after 10 disastrous years of Justin Trudeau's leadership, somehow re-elected the Liberal Party in this crook Mark Carney, who is stealing from under our noses, who is meeting with private business leaders all over the world. He's jet-setting all over the world, meeting with private business leaders, getting himself and Brookfield Asset Management richer on Canada's dime. It's truly disgusting. I'd love to see some more investigative journalism into all of Mark Carney's financial transactions and the large web he has. He lies as easily as he breathes. In the run-up to the election, he said, all that I own is real estate and personal cash. Turns out he has over 500 private investments, over 90% of which are in America. Think of that. The Prime Minister of Canada, the so-called proud Canadian, who's actually lived his entire adult life outside of Canada, over 90% of his investments are in America. Does that sound very Canadian to you? Because it sure doesn't to me. And also, watching the guy speak, I know people say he's an intelligent guy. He went to a fancy school, but my God, he cannot get through a sentence without also, funny enough, a telltale sign of a liar. They have to be very careful about what they're saying, so they're incredibly measured and throw in a lot of filler. And Mark Carney is the king of filler. Watch this guy talk. I have a very hard time believing the guy's as intelligent as they claim he is. I think he's a total puppet. But I want Canadians to be aware. Check out other news sources. I'm not saying you have to watch me, but watch other news sources than the CBC, CTV Global, because they're spewing out pure propaganda. There are a large number of news stories that you simply will never see watching these outlets because they only cover stories that are sympathetic to the Liberal Party. Please like, share, subscribe, join, become a member. If you'd like to support my work or grab some gear, there's some great Fight for Canada gear. Helps me get the message out, helps support me. I really appreciate it. Put a lot of effort into these videos every day. If you're watching on TikTok, make sure you're following YouTube, youtube.com/@FightForCanada2025. Canadian patriots are going to fight to take this country back.